You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our super generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right. Every Wookiee's favorite right-hand man is here to get me through this week's news on urbanism and transportation. As we do, we've got some previews of what's coming up on Talking Headways, but also we'll look back a bit. We just had an episode we recorded on artificial intelligence. I learned a lot, and I hope that folks got a chance to listen to this one because it was really, really interesting, especially how AI has been trained. And also, that people are already using it for public comment bot attacks and city council comments and stuff like that, and public feedback sessions, those types of things. It's really scary, and there's a lot of stuff people can do with artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and Midjourney and all those other ones that folks are talking about. You know what? I tried out some of them, and I just wasn't that impressed, but I can see where it's going. And in any event, there was a good discussion we had on the topic, and super fun. And I hope folks really liked that episode. Also, I just chatted with Susan Crawford, and she'll be back on the show. I hope this Thursday, I think, is when that show is coming out. And we're going to talk about her book about Charleston, South Carolina. Really interesting book, really interesting history there, and a really good kind of discussion about climate change and sea level rise and what it means for cities. I did not know that Charleston flooded so much and the streets became basically impassable, and the book was really kind of an eye-opener. And so that was a really interesting episode. One thing I took away from it was that how much we really, really need to spend money ahead of time before disasters actually strike, because we spend so much money afterwards just to protect the status quo, and people rebuild in place, and then the same thing happens again over and over again, and we just keep spending more money throwing it away into a pit. And really, the thing is that we could really actually make some big changes in how we do things and manage retreat and those types of things, relocation, and the idea of connecting people to different places. So I think that that's actually an important way to go, because honestly, I think it was something like 240 days in 2050, 240 days. There will be days where it's flooding in Charleston, and that's an insane amount of flooding. And I don't think people can live like that. Zach Subin and Ben Holland will be coming on the show to talk about a report they did for the Rocky Mountain Institute, and so we're looking forward to chatting with them. Also, I just set up an interview with Robert Stearns and his book Beyond Greenways from Island Press, so looking forward to chatting with him as well about walking and those types of things. Also, stay tuned because we've got a California High-Speed Rail panel coming up, and we'll share more details on that soon. I'm not hosting it, but we are recording it, and we'll be putting it out on the show. So looking forward to that discussion, maybe thinking about how we can speed up high-speed rail. And then finally, the best news is that Chrissy should be back on the next episode of Mondays. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm also going to save a few items that we would have talked about this week, and we'll talk about it with Chrissy when she gets here, and I'm looking forward to that. But we still got a lot to talk about this week. I'm really, really amped to share the news and the information that's coming out, all the stuff that we share on the newsletter. So looking forward to talking with you all for the next 30 minutes or so. I'm always happy to do a Monday show. We talk about such fun things. Okay. And well, let's get to the ads. Thanks everybody who has ordered bus and bike scarves. We really appreciate it. If you'd like to order, go to theoverheadwire.com. And if you want more than 5, we'll give you a 10% discount. Email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. I know it's hot out there. We'll talk about that actually during this show. It's hot in most of the country, and I know that the scarf is the last thing that you need, but maybe it can keep you from the sun, and maybe that you can get one of the lightweight ones. So if you're in a hot weather climate, it actually is probably a good way to keep the sun off your neck. But we'll be boosting the scarves more, I think, in the wintertime. But it's hot out there, man. It's I've lived it too. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I love California. And after growing up in Texas for so long, I had to run. I ran cross country and track in high school and college, and I had to train at midnight during the summer times in high school. I went out at midnight. I got chased home by police officers who thought that they were that I was a troublemaker wearing a Walkman and shorts, but lots of heat and lots of hoses at the house after a run. Also, don't forget to order any of the books we've covered on the show on our bookshop site, bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. We get maybe $1 or $2 a book if you order it from us in our shop, so we appreciate that. It keeps the show going. We do note that there's a couple of the books that the bookshop isn't carrying, but everything else is in there. And we've just put up a couple of ones, especially the one with Paula, and Susan's will be up there too when we finish that one, as well as Bob's when we talk about walking with him. So check that out if you get a chance, bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. Also, we have that shirt that I've been talking about, Cars Are Cholesterol, designed by Richard Wazinski out of North Texas, and we're selling them at TeePublic, bit.ly/Cars Are Cholesterol. Get the purple one. Okay, this is episode 136. We're live together and in session. Before we get to the show, I want to let folks know that they can get this podcast and Talking Headways wherever you find your podcast, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Sorry to the Stitcher listeners who will see that service come to an end soon, but hopefully you can keep following us on other channels. I'm going to put the RSS feed in the show notes, and also you should be able to find it by typing in Talking Headways wherever you get your podcast. So, or if you want to go to YouTube, we have it on YouTube. It just automatically posts the audio. Also SoundCloud too. And so, if you want to go anywhere, basically it's there. Okay, well, here's what you all have been waiting for, the news. Let's get to that. Of course, the news is brought to you by the Overhead Wire Daily, our newsletter where we go through about 1,500 items a day and we pull out the 40 things that we think are the most interesting in the topics of transportation, urban design and urbanism, urban issues as it pertains to things like housing, as well as the environment, and how that pertains to cities. There's lots of environmental stuff, obviously, these days, but lots of really interesting things in the transportation space, too. Just check out the newsletter by going to theoverheadwire.com. Again, we don't take anybody's credit card information. You get a 2-week free trial, and you can try it out for free. All you need to do is give us an email address, and then once you sign out, or if you sign off, we delete the email address, and it's gone, and so nobody else can use it. So check it out if you get a chance. We know that there's a lot of you that love it and listen, read the newsletter religiously every day. And actually, I've gotten some complaints that people telling me that I'm spending too much of their time because I give them too many news items that are good and interesting to read. So I appreciate that. Okay, well, let's get started, shall we? Predictable city branding. Cities and companies are increasingly branding themselves in predictable, Instagrammable products. David A. Banks' term for this convergence is the third level of city marketing and economic development he termed the city authentic, succeeding the city beautiful and the city efficient movements that left lasting marks on cityscapes. As places that create and test new culture disappear because of algorithmic advertising, cities will converge in sameness until everything is commodified. This was by David A. Banks in Dezeen. I think this is pretty true. It seems like this is happening. He talks about in the article that every place has a craft brewery named after some local historic landmark, or everywhere you go into cities or places has bars that are similar, with similar drinks and those types of things. Places somewhat are kind of losing their identity, though there isn't much different than in the past, I guess, when local vernaculars, architectural vernaculars anyway, were lost due to the Industrial Revolution, and the ability to ship products long distances allowed people to get things from further away. And obviously, we talked about this a little bit in the audiobook of Raymond Unwin's Town Planning and Practice. One of the things that struck me from that time period was, a lot of the cities and towns built their buildings with local materials, obviously. And then as soon as the Industrial Revolution and the railroads hit, they could actually ship stuff from one side of the country to the other. And so you started to see vernacular that was very similar. And I think that's kind of a similar thing. It's just amplified because of social media. And so people see something they think is really cool and they want to copy it. And then so what happens is all this stuff converges, and it seems like the world is actually very similar. And I do wish that we weren't all fighting an algorithm, though. That's one of the things that I thought about when I read this piece. There's spots where places are different, and I wish that was the case continuously. And I do think that Instagram is a big issue related to this. And then people are going out there and Instagramming and finding the places that are unique, but then it gets copied and maybe somebody brings it back to another place. And so the sameness begins again. I'm curious what you all think about this, because I'm wondering if you think that cities are doing similar things, or if it's just what we see. because it's the things that people are sending back on social media. I think there's the tourist spots where everybody goes, and people are complaining about these tourist spots getting overwhelmed, and it's not exactly what people are Instagramming, and so they complain, and they are disappointed when they go on these vacations where they think that Instagram showed them, the people on Instagram showed them something that would be interesting and fun, but then it ended up to be over touristed. And so I'm wondering if there's a lot of places that are actually like they're gems. There's something out there that you can experience and find that will be different experience than what's shown all over Instagram. I think we had this experience when I went to Italy in 2009. We did it, the travel we did was part family related. We wanted to see where part of my family was from, and so we went to places where the village where my mom's family is from. It only has 10 people in it, so it's not really one of those things where you would Instagram from. It's not a tourist destination or anything like that. But it was exciting to go and see some of those things and go up in northern Italy. I mean, we didn't go to Rome, we didn't go to places like that, Venice or anything like that. We went to Milan and the lakes, and we went to Turin. But we also did little things like see the harp museum or off the side of the road, or see a place where they wove the velour for the palio in Siena and things like that. So we tried to find things that were kind of off the beaten path but interesting, and I think that that's probably possible. But Instagram and all those things make everything similar. So I think there's still opportunities to do stuff different. I did read a New York Times article, which is thinking about that. That's part of the problem is the New York Times is something you read and then everybody does the thing. But you talked about how San Francisco specifically is a haven for Burmese restaurants, and the idea really never took off in places like LA the same as it did in San Francisco, even though there's two Burmese populations in both places. So perhaps there's some hope. Perhaps there's some hope from at least some of my experiences, and places aren't going to all turn the same. And you can, craft an experience that you want. If you want to go someplace and have an experience, that's not just, that's travel and kind of learning new things and going to places where you want to see something different. But, from a perspective of this article, I think that David kind of hits a note on it, and I think it's interesting to read about it. So check it out if you get a chance. I'd love to hear what you all think. Paris can roast, flee, or act. During a 2003 summer heat wave in France, 15,000 people died, many of whom were stuck in top-floor Parisian apartments under heat-trapping zinc roofs. Now, officials in Paris are looking for ways to cool the city to avoid more painful heat wave impacts as the climate changes. Retrofitted rooftop gardens, urban forestry programs, and redesigned streets for active transportation and cooler surfaces are all on the table. This was by Jeff Goodell and Yale E360. I think this means everyone. I think we all need to adapt in some form or fashion, especially to take carbon out of the air. It's like Paula said when she was on the podcast a few weeks ago, we have to figure out how to address the main issue, which is figuring out mitigation strategies for what's happening now. And so I'm not sure how you mitigate 31 days of 110 degrees or whatever it's been in Phoenix, which is oppressive and hot, and that's crazy. And people are going to start to lose it soon, I imagine. At least from the articles that I've read, it's getting a little bit crazy with the failures in air conditioning and things like that. But I do think that there's adaptation, and then there's just like this need for everybody to do something about climate change, because it's coming, and you can tell this summer that it's hot. It's really hot. Next up, hurricanes displaced Florida's working and middle class. After Hurricane Ian damaged coastal communities in Florida last fall, many of the working and middle class retirees and homeowners that lived there couldn't afford to fix and maintain their homes, so they sold their land and left. Now these communities are changing as only ultra-wealthy are able to build homes up to standard and afford the soaring insurance rates. Zach Coleman in Politico. And this is interesting. This is framed interestingly, right? Like, so basically they're saying that the coastal space hit by Hurricane Ian is only for rich people now, which I guess that makes sense, because we don't necessarily want people living there, and then also we don't want the insurance kind of coming back and rebuilding over and over again. And that same idea that I had at the beginning of the show, which is, we do better by managed retreat, trying to figure out how to spend money early on to get people to safer places. I get the appeal of the ocean, and I get the appeal of wanting to live nearby, but at the same time, we also don't want those people to experience the same thing over and over and over again. So it's an interesting framing, thinking about like people who were there in the middle class folks that had saved and built houses and have been there and then got wiped out, leaving and going somewhere safer, I think that's probably a good thing for them. I don't like, the idea of displacement gentrification in that way of, only rich people can live in a certain area. But at the same time, you also don't want the insurance rates to allow people to live somewhere where they're just going to get wiped out over and over again. And if people want to spend their money on something that they can lose and not be insured, or if they're insured at a super, super high rate and they're paying that insurance, then maybe that's okay. But I don't know. I'm kind of thinking about this in a different way now, I think, maybe. But it's a tricky question too, because, displacement isn't, and from a place that you've known for a long time, it's a big issue. And there is root shock, related to that. There is the amount of family feeling that you've built up in a place, and understanding and friends and all those things. But at the same time, if it's going to hit over and over again, that might be a problem. Sewers can't handle storms. A series of new reports from the Federal Emergency Management Agency share that many sewer systems around the country aren't able to handle extreme rainfall events that are made more likely because of climate change. The result might be more instances like Hurricane Ida, which flooded basements in New York and New Jersey. Increasing the capacity of these drainage systems might take decades and billions of dollars before they're able to suitably drain water. This was by Thomas Frank in Scientific American. Same stuff as the previous two articles. Susan Crawford will be on this week, and I think that this is especially important. Our storm drains and systems weren't designed for sea level rise, and it's coming. And she kind of goes through what they've done over time to try to fix this, and little things, cleaning out the sewers and those types of things. But we're this close to the Gulf Stream seizing up and the ice caps melting. I think many of these cases, it's not about bigger capacity for pipes or spending billions of dollars on that, but again, some sort of managed retreat where people can live in other places. Even here in SF, we got that day with 5 inches of rain, and it was insane. And my basement actually had water in it, and we weren't built for that. We weren't built for that much rain, and so we have to figure it out. I don't know if I'm living up on a hill, so. I think in Burrito Justice's map of the archipelago of San Francisco at 200-foot sea level rise, I think I'm right on the edge. But there's other places that are like 6 feet, 10 feet. The Dutch actually went to Charleston, for example, in the book with Susan Crawford, and we'll talk about this again. But the Dutch went there and said, you shouldn't have any people living within 6 to 10 feet of sea level. Everybody should be above 10 feet. And that makes a ton of sense. I mean, it makes a ton of sense. And so the storm water, can't go anywhere if the storm water is a gravity system, and the water is above where the gravity would take the water. So that doesn't make any sense. And I think that's a tough thing to handle for these storm systems. And it's going to take a while. And they're obviously going to do it. They're probably going to spend billions of dollars. But is it something that they should be doing, or figuring out another way to live with the water somehow? That's another question. Okay, let's go somewhere else. City livability rankings tell a biased story. The capital of Bangladesh, Dhaka, has a population of 23 million people that ebbs and flows from rural to urban spaces for work and daily life. The migrations tell a story of a place that's different than the one told by international magazines through annual livability rankings. Rickshaw garages spread about the city tell the story of flexible accommodation and work, and how the line between urban and rural is increasingly blurred. This was by Shreyashi Dasgupta and Anamyak Prinz in The Conversation. This was an interesting story about how people move from urban to rural and rural back again, looking for work and living. And I agree with the livability rankings are BS, and the article is specific to point out that they are created by expats in a lot of these countries, never really asking locals what they love about them. And I actually think we should just stop ranking cities. That's how we got these same places, honestly, the rankings and the Instagrams and all that stuff we talked about in the first item. Let's take all the good ideas from each other, but let's not export the bad ideas. And it's not a competition. We should have good life everywhere. I think that's really important to think about. Even in North America, which, by the way, I'll never stop fighting for good transportation, safe transportation here in North America, or sharing information about how we can do better with all the folks that love hearing more information about making it work. Like you all listening to this show, you all know what I'm talking about, and I'll leave it at that. But let's make North America better. Amsterdam's red light controversy. Amsterdam is trying to reduce overcrowding in the central red light district. One plan involves moving much of the famous red light district into the suburbs. But like many discussions these days, it brings into focus conflicts about what gives a place its character and who deserves to be heard when big decisions are made. Charlotte McDonald Gibson in Time magazine. This one was a really great piece, and I hope folks get to read it in time. And it wasn't necessarily what I expected when I first started reading, which is always the sign of a good item. Over tourism is definitely a big thing in European cities, and I'm sure people are trying to figure out how to fix it with the best intentions. But taking people and moving them to the suburbs away from where they feel safe isn't necessarily the answer either. And there's a tension for sure between what people think the area should be or want it to be versus what it actually is. And so, basically, Amsterdam folks in there want to take 100 of the prostitution windows and move them to a suburban erotic center where they have programs and they have other things going on related to the community. And there are 230 windows in the red light district, and they want to move 100 of them. Basically, there's a lot of stuff in the article that kind of is frustrating. The workers hadn't been consulted in a serious way. The mayor, has basically said they need safer places to work, but a lot of the workers feel safer in the urban setting where there's a lot of people, the eyes on the street. Jane Jacobs' idea. Basically, they've told the workers that they're not part of the problem, but yet they're trying to move them somewhere and try to figure out something that's different. And when, this architect who's working on this center, the erotic center that they're doing in the suburbs, he actually didn't even get a chance to talk with any of the folks that would be working there because the city told them that he wouldn't be able to consult directly with them. Basically, the city told him that it was a political discussion and that it would only take place between the city and the groups representing the workers. And for me, that's frustrating because, basically architects and planners, you want to talk to the people who you're planning for, who you're building for, and not to be able to do that is unfortunate and frustrating at the same time. And, basically, I think they're all talking past each other to a certain extent too. Basically, I feel like when I was thinking about this, I feel like it echoes discussions about vulnerable populations and communities here in the U.S. And I think that's why it hit me so hard. They don't consult the workers or the people that they should be consulting. They want to move people from one part to the other from one place to the other because it's uncomfortable for them. But really, a lot of the tourism, the over-tourism, they don't come to visit the red light district for the erotic zone that's there. For the sex workers, they come for the history of the place, for the bars, for hanging out. And the Time magazine article actually highlighted this, asking people in the streets what they were there for and what they were interested in, and it wasn't necessarily what they were trying to move away. And so I think that's a tension that is here, and I think that's a tension, and it kind of speaks to a lot of different issues here in the United States about how we plan cities, how we communicate with the populations that are in places where maybe they want to, some people want change and other people want it to stay the same. So I think it's a really interesting piece. I hope folks get a chance to read it. The piece in Time. Obviously, we're going to have all those links in the show notes as we always do, and on the website, theoverheadwire.com, when I post the link to the show and the audio of the show up there. So, okay, so we're into bonus items now. Those are the main articles. There's a number of articles that I didn't talk about this week that we're going to talk about with Chrissy at some point. So looking forward to talking about that with her, especially. One on my list to talk about is about Lyft wanting to get rid of Motivate and bike share in the United States. So we'll cover that in the future, I hope. So let's get to the bonus items. These are some of the items that I thought were interesting that didn't necessarily get the same amount of clicks, but I still felt that they were interesting, and hopefully you all do too. An ancient design feature called a skywell might be good way to keep homes cool in the summer. In southern China, the centers of old homes designed with a skywell are opened up to the sky with a trough of water at the bottom, allowing hot air to escape while evaporation occurs, keeping temperatures up to 8 degrees cooler inside. This was in BBC Future. There was another item too where they were talking about this spiral design, and I think it was also in BBC Future. Maybe it was in another design magazine. Maybe it was Arch Daily or something like that. And they were talking about how the design used in Middle Eastern places could actually keep things like 50 degrees cooler, which is crazy. That's a lot. But that just like we should learn from designs that have been around for centuries that people have used. Miami-Dade County forgot to renew its gas tax and will lose out on $18 million between August, when they can realistically renew the tax, and January. Local elected officials say the state notified the city too late in order to renew without a gap in collection. This is by Governing Magazine. A change in governing coalitions in Spain after recent elections has led to the discussions about transportation and climate priorities in cities around the country. The new right-leaning groups want to rip out bike lanes and zero-emission zones after the previous parties made big strides in sustainable transportation over the last decade. This is in Reuters. I think that Spanish election is still up in the air. And I'm looking forward to seeing if the government is actually created, the parliamentary government is actually created, or they actually have to go back to elections because they can't form a government because the two groups are tied, or the two coalitions are tied in terms of votes. So they might actually have to go and vote again in 2 months if they can't come up with a deal between the groups. After initial success and then an election, the Portland Street Response Program, which replaced police officers with mental health workers for mental health crises calls, is facing elimination. Dozens of local organizations have signed a letter to save the program and get lawmakers to fund it properly to ensure it continues. This was in Oregon Public Broadcasting. This was this item actually, the street response has been very successful apparently, and the city hasn't been funding it appropriately. And I think that's it's something that we should be doing in other places. If you have these calls for mental health crises, send the people who are experts in that, not necessarily police. And so this type of police reform is happening in places all around the country. We just need to support it when it happens. Police officers don't want to be in that position, and I think this is a good way to go. House Republicans are trying to pull back funding from the IIJA infrastructure bill by slashing agency budgets and annual appropriations. It would leave the bill's funding intact for things like Amtrak and water infrastructure, but cut funding that was already existing that the bill was supposed to supplement. Washington Post. So basically what they're doing, or they're trying to do anyways, is they're leaving the bill intact with all the money that's available in the bill, in the infrastructure bill, but then they're cutting the appropriations that were already there, right? So they're going to actually cut the budgets of the agencies so that it seems like we're leaving the bill intact, but then we're getting rid of previous bills to cut funding, which is ridiculous. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But that's how it goes in Washington these days. Rising insurance rates could force building owners to sell, but then the insurance rate increases might also kill a lot of potential deals for new owners as they find out the true costs and back out. The issue could have a wide-ranging impact, including reducing the number of apartments that are built moving forward. And this is in Smart Cities Dive. That's a real issue, I imagine, not being able to build apartments because the insurance rates are too high and nobody wants to take that. Again, insurance, it's going to be a big talking point over the next, I feel like, decade or so. Tampa has completed its first citywide mobility plan and has budgeted $2 billion over the next 30 years to hopefully address gaps in the city pedestrian and bike networks. Initial projects in the plan include more sidewalks on high-injury corridors and expansion of the city's low-stress bike network. Hawaii's Governor Josh Green wants to suspend housing rules and regulations in an emergency proclamation in order to build 50,000 housing units in the next 3 to 5 years. People are leaving the island because of housing costs now more Native Hawaiians live on mainland United States than in Hawaii. This was in Civil Beat. A couple more here that we've got before the end. The city of Portland is being sued over a 1971 Oregon law called the Bicycle Bill that requires basically complete streets when a road is reconstructed. The lawsuit was tossed previously because the plaintiff lacked standing, but now 15 Portlanders have signed on. It makes me wonder what happens if they win and whether other cities that have laws or rules that are unfollowed will be affected. I'm looking at you, Transit First SF. Also, the lawsuit in New Jersey is bringing against Federal Highway Administration over New York's congestion pricing plan has been getting tons of ink. But interestingly, I've seen a lot of writers and news items from New Jersey criticizing the suit. At a time when the plan is overheating, why is the state trying to protect drivers and not plowing more support into the hundreds and thousands of transit riders that would benefit from increased service in New Jersey? The European Union has passed a law that would require electric car chargers every 37 miles from 2025 onward. The network of fast chargers would allow payments without other subscription requirements and reduce range anxiety. This was in The Verge. And finally, Bend, Oregon is using the state's land use laws to create a fire-safe zone for development they hope will keep people safe. Regulations meant to curb sprawl have still seen holes, so new attempts to understand fire planes and future development might be the next step. This was in Sightline Institute. Basically they're trying to figure out what the fire planes are, where the fires would spread faster, and they're trying not to build there. And so using the land use laws, using the urban growth boundaries to figure that out, I think is a really big thing, especially after those fires really, really cut through Oregon a couple of years ago. So that's it for the news this week. We're going to have more news next when Chrissy comes back, and I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to chatting with her about some of the news items that we didn't talk about today. But this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. You keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without you, so thank you very much. You could support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We had people sign up each month during the pandemic, and we're really super appreciative of that. Seriously, it's been a huge benefit. $2 a month will get you some stickers and a handwritten note. One of our Cars Are Cholesterol stickers will be included, and $10 a month will get you one of our bus-only scarves. So if you love what we're producing, feel free to hit us up there. Get one of our scarves, buy one of the books in the bookshop sites, get the book Town Planning and Practice by Raymond Unwin, the audiobook. Really helps us out. And finally, listen to our questions and comments. You can email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com or any of the social sites where the podcast appears. Post on there and we'll see it, and hopefully I'll have a response for you. A lot of the emails I've been getting lately, I've been responding personally, and hopefully you all have been appreciating that. And I look forward to getting more emails and reading them on the air if I get a chance. And finally, Puppies and Butterflies. This is part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe just didn't fit in other sections. This last Friday, Braid, the band, came to the Great American Music Hall in SF, and I went to the show with my wife. And you may recognize the lead singer of Braid is Bob Nana, who is the person who sings the intro and outro song for this podcast. So it was good to see them sing, and it was the 25th anniversary of the Frame and Canvas album, which if you're an emo fan, you know that album from start to finish, and it was super fun to go. It was the first time actually that my wife and I had been out together alone since the baby was born. So it was nice to get out and do some adult stuff. We got a babysitter. And it was super great. And live music is awesome, and I really do miss it. I want to go to more shows now and check things out. Although I am getting old, I feel like maybe 3/4 of the way through the album, they replayed Frame and Canvas as the album as the 25th anniversary. And I feel like 3/4 of the way through, we're like, man, we're so tired. We can't stand here for 3 hours like we used to. But it's super fun, and live music is so great. And you know what? From there, I feel like a lot of people are bashing and really ripping on San Francisco lately, but I could feel something there. I could feel like I was close to people in the city, and I felt like it's not what people are saying. It's an amazing place, and people come together for a show like this and have fun and dance around and sing the songs and they know the words, and it's just really fun to get together with people and enjoy something like that. And I think San Francisco, it can be a tough place sometimes. But I think there's beauty in it, and hopefully people will realize that and not, and stop bashing it, because it's not what you think it is. So anyways, you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. You can find me on Mastodon at theoverheadwire.sfba social. I post 3 top articles on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays there. And thanks for joining us on Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous patrons for supporting the podcast. We really appreciate it. We'll see you next time, and hopefully Chrissy will be here to regale us with stories of of transportation around the country. So we thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Talking